Hey guys, Sandy here. Sparks challenged me to tell you all a story. So today's going to be story time. It has to be an original story. So the one that I'm going to tell you is one that I wrote a few years ago. I used to be a member of deviantART, and one of the other artists that I kept in touch with, she used to do these beautiful digital paintings. And I used one of them as inspiration to write a short story. At the time I was really into writing a lot of poetry and decided to try something a little bit different. So I'm actually going to share with you part one, because the part that I ended up writing is part two in a series of short stories that still isn't quite done yet. But today I'm going to read you part one of a story that I have entitled Love's Flame. And while I read it to you, I will have the painting that she made, and I'll post that in the video so you can see that instead of looking at my beautiful face reading and not really staring at the camera. And just so you know, you can't punish me on this because I have permission to go over the time limit. So here we go. This is part one of Love's Flame. The brook laughed as its waters tumbled over the rocks on its journey through the fields. The birds sang, and the breeze of late autumn played its own tune as it swept through the trees. But there was nothing to laugh or to sing about when it came to the day's mood. There was trouble in the air. The laird had felt it as soon as he'd left the castle gates. What exactly was wrong he didn't know, but he had a strong suspicion it had something to do with the neighbouring baron and his feud with the inhabitants of nearby Loch Lomond Castle. It was widely known that Loch Lomond and the baron's lands in Stormhaven had long harboured a deep loathing in regards to one another. What had started the feud very few people knew, and even fewer were willing to speak of. But suffice to say that peace between the two houses had never existed in living memory. Of course, their location didn't help matters. The natural division of the Scottish landscape ran directly between the two, and the cultural battle between the traditionists in the Highlands and the so-called modernists in the Lowlands only added to the dispute. The deep waters of the loch separating their lands added a touch of grace to the change of terrain, but to cross them meant to step into a different world, as if the very air had somehow changed. To make matters worse, the baron's allegiances with the English, who had long pressed their influence on the Scottish Lowlanders, spoke of a betrayal deeper than words. While he rubbed elbows with the greedy and thieving English, and turned his back on his own culture and customs in favour of what he considered a more profitable circle, the Laird of Loch Lomond kept his castle as much as possible in the ways of the Highlands. The vast differences in policy and morality were enough to make the residents hate each other on principle. And so the feud continued. Each generation had passed on their seething hatred to the next, and while very rarely did any physical skirmish take place between them, the Loch Lomond guard tower was somewhat famous in the region, having been built directly on the border between the two nobles' lands, and patrolled by strong and fiercely loyal knights, with specific orders to guard against any Stormhaven advance. Until recently, there had been no reason to suspect trouble from either estate. While the anger between the two was clearly present and simmering just below the surface, all had stayed quiet until about 2 years ago, when the dreaded plague had made its second major sweep of the nation in a decade. Thankfully, his own lands had been spared, but the young laird had it on good authority that Loch Lomond had suffered much worse. The wretched disease had ravaged the servants' quarters, leaving at least a dozen dead, and several more pockmarked and scarred. Most of the family didn't dare leave the castle walls, and many of the usual guards had to be temporarily replaced, which, according to the young laird's very reliable source, had proved to be somewhat of a disaster. Apparently, some very key security details had been underestimated, and the new guards for the castle's most precious treasure had instead sought their wealth in the wine cellar, leaving the Baron his opportunity to take revenge for over a century of feuding. A stealthy mercenary had been hired in secret, and when her need for protection had been at its greatest, the Lady of Lochlarn had been snatched from her home to be held captive in Stormhaven Tower. While he was appalled, the Laird couldn't say that he was surprised of hearing the news. The Baron had always been a man of action, never one to believe in fate or in chance. He chose to make his own luck, always on the lookout for opportunities to advance himself. In his greed, he used his position to get what he wanted, and should that fail, he would resort to any means necessary to finish the job. The kidnapping had been no different. It was the ambition of many men to take Lochlarn's lady as their bride. Being the only child, and therefore heir to Lochlarn's lands and riches, the temptation associated with wedding the young woman was difficult to suppress. Add to that her stunning beauty, and it wasn't hard to see why she was the most sought-after lady of marriageable age in the Highlands. The Baron was not immune to such temptation, despite his deep hatred for the family. But it was said that the Lady of Lochlarn had refused all offers of marriage, and had instead given her heart to the one assigned to her protection. The Baron had been incensed at the news, and after being rejected yet again, saw no other course to make her his own than to make sure that if he couldn't have her, then no one else could either. It had been 2 years since the plague had presented its opportunity, and the young Laird marvelled at the fact that no attempt had yet been made to rescue the lady from Stormhaven's lonely tower. Given the history between those involved, how could the Lord of Lochlarn allow the sole heir to his fortune to remain in the clutches of his long-opposed archenemy? Did he disapprove of his knight so much that he would rather see his only daughter marry a man he was sworn to loathe with every fibre of his being? The Laird didn't doubt it. The Lord of Lochlarn was a haughty man, and the pride he had in his station was such that he held in great contempt any servant attempting to rise above their status. It was likely that the man could not bear to see his only child sink so low. What worried the Laird now was what he was hearing amongst the idle chatter of his own servants as he returned to the castle from his evening ride. Knowing that their master preferred to rub the horse down himself, they had retreated into a corner to give him his privacy, completely unaware that he could overhear their conversation. According to one stable hand, who had it from the cook, who had heard from a page, the rumour from Stormhaven was that the Baron's patience with Lochlarn's lady had run thin, and he was determined to have her for himself once and for all. A small army of about 12 men was to set out for Lochlarn that very night, with orders to destroy the lady's beloved knight, and anyone else who got in their way. This troubled the Laird greatly. The Lord of Lochlarn would not take kindly to an unprovoked attack, and would likely rally those still loyal to the old clan allegiances, which the Baron would gladly take as an excuse to make war on an old enemy. And with the Baron in bed with the English, who would jump at the chance to claim more Scottish lands, the conflict between the two households could likely escalate into full-scale war. Not liking the direction the situation could take, the young Laird left the grooming of his prize stallion to his stable hands, and went to confirm this rumour with the mentioned page. Then to warn his captain of the guard, to keep men at the ready, for if the rumours were true, there were indeed very dark days ahead. So, that is part 1 of Love's Flame. Thank you all for listening. I may be persuaded in the future to read you part 2, which of course was the part that originated the entire series to begin with. I will put a link down in the doobly-doo to the piece of artwork that you have been staring at while I've been reading. I strongly advocate the support of artists, especially amateur artists who are not commissioned and get absolutely no pay for their work, but do it simply for the joy of creating. So please, please, please visit her page and take a look at her pieces, because they're brilliant. I mean, she does extraordinary work. And I'll also put a link to my DeviantART page so that you can see some of my work there. As for the next video, I challenge Lee. Lee has been very curious as to the undertakings of the Renegades, so she's been wanting to get involved. So this will be her very first challenge. Lee, I challenge you to give us a cooking lesson. It can be anything you want. But yeah, give us a cooking lesson. I'm curious to see how that'll get done. So until next time, this is Sandy signing out. I'll see you guys later.